autobiography of Mencken, talks about how lucky he was to have been born when he was. So we're going to read that today to the memoir.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight from Mencken Central Branch Mencken program. My name is Evan Dennis, and I'm in the Special Collections Department here at the State Library Resource Center. One of our collections is the H.O. Mencken collection, so really excited to discuss it tonight. I'm also excited because tonight's event is the first of its kind event presented live from the Mencken room to an audience here and at home. Um, Before I introduce tonight's presenters, I'd like to let you know that this year's Mencken Day will be Saturday, September 9th, here at the Central Branch. I'd like to invite all of you to attend. Today's events are going to include Mencken Society's annual meeting at 10 a.m., the Mencken Room Open House with our curator, Patrick, and our keynote speech by world-renowned journalist Wayne Wicker, who's known for his work with USA Today, Baltimore Sun, U.S. News and World Report, and others. Mr. Wickham's a fascinating individual. He's flown on Air Force One as a special guest with President Barack Obama. He's crisscrossed the United States with Mandela, even dined with Fidel Castro. So it's definitely one to put on your calendars. Now to introduce tonight's speakers. Vince Fitzpatrick is a native Baltimorean. He received his BA in English at the University of Virginia and his MA and PhD in English at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. He joined Enoch Pratt in August of 1980 as the assistant curator of the Mencken collection and became the curator in December of 1997. His books include biographies of H.O. Mencken and Gerald W. Johnson. Vince is an all-around great guy. Our other speaker is Paul Chasen. Paul is the librarian in charge of the H.O. Mencken room. He also manages virtual reference services here at the Free Library. If you've called, emailed, or chatted, there's a good chance. Paul's prior work experiences at Enoch Pratt include managing the statewide virtual reference service Maryland Access Now and managing the grants collection. Paul is a BA in social science and history, secondary education from Towson, and a plus from the University of Maryland. Privileged working with both of these guys. So without further ado, Paul and Vince. Sorry about that. My apologies. I'll start just from scratch again. These wireless mics, you just never know. They're those two-click systems. You have to press one or the other, ideally both. So I just want to say thanks to everyone for being here this evening. Thought as a warm-up that we'd begin by playing an audio clip of H.O. Mencken, Henry Louis Mencken, being interviewed by Donald Howe Kirkley Sr., a former writer and editor of The Sun. This video clip takes place in 1948. And as you're listening to it, you'll find out that it literally has to do with Mencken speaking. And that this is, if not the only one, most likely the only audio clip of its kind that is in place. It was recorded at the Library of Congress. And listen carefully to him. You'll get a nice introduction to how he uses his words and phrases to express his viewpoints, whether you agree or disagree with him. Let's hear more about what he thinks about the roads.
I'm a little confused after that ride over from Baltimore. Did you ever see such a hideous boulevard in your life?
I suppose there are boulevards just as terrible, but I've never seen any. No, it's a disgrace to humanity without question.
Why?
Well, because it represents the American lust for the hideous, the delight in ugliness for its own sake. It's very appropriately, it leads to the capital of the United States.
I remember you were using that phrase quite often when you wrote for the Sun papers, the American libido for the ugly.
Yeah,
That was a favorite topic.
yeah. Well, the idea in that was this, that such horrible exhibitions are not due to mere ignorance and innocence. There is a positive delight in the ugly. You can, if you go down the street in Baltimore in those endless rows of two-story houses on a summer night, you can look in them. They're usually illuminated more or less. And you notice you go sometimes for 2 or 3 blocks without seeing a single object that's not hideous.
I think we got a pretty good snapshot of what Mencken thought at times about his surroundings and experiences. But as you keep listening to this recording, and it is available for free on the Internet Archive, and it is available, believe it or not, at our library in LP format and as a transcript format at our Best and Next collection. As you keep listening, you really just get this great snapshot overview of Mencken. And it ends up almost being like a mini biography as you keep going on. So Vince and I, what we thought we would do this evening is give you the opportunity to, as an option, just write down what you would like to learn, topic of interest, a question, something like that. Papers in this box, pencils are in this box. Just going to start passing it around the room. And then at the end of today's program, we will do our best to answer some of those topics, those questions that you have. Anything that we are unable to get to, you will have our contact information before, and you can definitely let us know what you want to know. While the box is going around, just want to make sure that you have a snapshot of what we want to cover today. Today's program, besides being introductory, just will focus on the facts about Mencken, with primarily covering those facts. And I will primarily be doing the part about the research, the finding of information. We think that you're going to take away more than what is on the screen. But what you have in front of you is meaningful to hone in. So what I'm going to do is give the floor to Vince. He's going to start going over a chronology of Mencken. And Vince, whenever you're ready, please let us know more.
Thank you, and Paul, thank you, and welcome to the Mencken Room. And let me give you a little background on this. We're going to go over and take a look at this exhibit over here where Evan is sitting. And then we're going to come down and take a look at this exhibit where Paul is standing. And I want to give a shout out to several people, and I want to give an in memoriam. Mencken was the most important writer who was born and stayed in Maryland. We have a very rich tradition here of writers. Fitzgerald lived here for a while, as you know. Gerald Johnson lived here, Poe. But Mencken was the most important one who was born and stayed here. And this is a very important Mencken collection. It's one of the most important single author collections in the country. And if we can look over here to Eben's left at the rear of that case, we would not be here for any of this if it were not for Betty Adler. And Betty Adler was the founding curator of this collection. She died way too young. She passed at 53. My Lord. And I knew her when I was an undergraduate student and a very young graduate student. And she is the one who organized all this material. She edited Menckeniana. She did the bibliography and the correspondence. And if it were not for her, we wouldn't be in this wonderful collection now. Mencken had a long, important relationship with the Pratt Library, and we did an exhibit. Shout out to my colleague here, Deborah Elfenbein, whose visual sense is far far better than mine. And she really helped me with this. My training is in writing, not in the visual arts. So Deborah's far better than I am, and she made the exhibit great. And we're hoping to get that exhibit up online on the Mencken page. Now, if you take a look, there's another picture sitting on the front of that case. And that was an extraordinary event this summer. The person with all the gray hair on the left is me. And there are two ladies here, Angela Johnson and Professor Ha from San Diego State. And what we were able to do was to go back to an iconic picture of Mencken taken in the 1929 and identify who the people were. Now, Eben has written I'm going to give you a chance to talk about this now if you'd like it a little bit. Eben has written very eloquently on the value of what we discovered that day in being able to identify who these children are. Could you talk about that briefly? Right. Yeah. So I've been here 43 years, and we had an extraordinary day that day, right in this room. So Mencken was very generous to this institution when he was alive, and he continues to be generous since he passed. Now, over here, this exhibit here is Mencken and music, and I want to give an in memoriam to David Donovan, my colleague who passed way too young in September. I know the writing end of this, and I know the scholarly end. He knew the music end much better. And David passed way too young. David did videos, he did tours, he did exhibits, he wrote articles. He was a professional musician. So he knew this end far better than I. The gentleman here who was talking to me before was talking about the Shell House restaurant. Let me see if I can get the number right. 412 North Harrod, west side between Franklin and Mulberry. Shot in 80, which was the year of the centennial. And they've given us a number of very nice things here. Before you all leave, take a look at the mug in the middle. It's got Mencken's name on it. Welcome. 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 Please come in and sit and get comfortable. So give a shout out to Betty. I'm Vince Fitzpatrick. I'm the curator here. Thank you so much for coming to the event, and I hope you all have a good, enjoyable evening here. So David passed far too young, and as did Betty Adler, and it's very important to recognize them. Now, on the south side of this table, we have a feature about David, and we have an obit that Fred Rasmussen wrote about David for the Sun. Okay. We're going to do our best to answer the questions this is about you. It's not about me. And when I give a tour, I try to tailor the tour to what the people want. So we're going to try to answer the questions that you have. And we also have questions coming in over the chat. Okay. All right. Mencken's born in West Palmer. Mr. Jerome is currently with the Pratt House, and he was for the longest time with the Poe. And the Poe is on Amity Street, as you know, the Poe House. And if you go south half a block, you'll be on Lex, and a block and a half east is Mencken's house. Now it's a site now. It's not. There's a building there, but it's not a building where Mencken was born. 1883, the family moved to 1524 Holland Street. How much did they pay? We know because Mencken saved everything. $2,900. $2,900, right? And right across the street on Hollins, you have the only municipal monument. No, it's not a municipal monument. You have the only monument to Mencken. It was a Holland Street monument. 1896, graduated from the Baltimore Polytechnic Institute. Now, if you look north here, if you look through this window, it's a northern view. Poly then, to give you current landmark, Mercy Hospital South Tower, Mercy Hospital South Tower off Calvert Street over by Sherwood Gardens. And Mencken graduated from there 15 years and 9 months. Never went to school again. Now, if I can use a big, long, fancy Greek term, Mencken was an autodidact, self-taught person. And he originally said, I was spared the intellectual humiliations of a college education. And he said later, using irony, some people go to college and succeed in getting out. Others go to college and never succeed in getting out. The latter are called professors. Now, this was important, the fact that he was an autodidact, because originally he was very self-conscious of this. And it showed up in his writing. And he said, I'm going to show you I've read my Bible. And I'm going to show you I've read my Dickens. And I'm going to show you I've read my Shakespeare. So the writing was overdone. It was overwrought. It was overly elusive. But once he found his voice, the writing changed. And there was a running battle between Mencken and the Academy. And it was not fair because Mencken wrote so much better. And the professors who had attacked him largely wished that they had left him alone. So the whole question of Mencken and the Academy, to do some Baltimore geography, the place where Mencken went to school, Cortlandt Street, doesn't exist anymore. I can give you a landmark that you'll know: Mercy South Tower, Sherwood Gardens. You're about a block and a half east of here. And then Poly moved to North Avenue, to where the school administration building is. When I was in school back in the 60s, that's where Poly was there. And then Poly in 67 and 68 moved out to Falls Road, where it is now. So that was very important. Here was, here is the diploma from Poly. And where are we here? Does anybody know where this beautiful picture of the Mencken family is? We're a little bit east of that. Let me take you to the intersection. It's an intersection that you'll know: Falls Road and Northern Parkway. Okay, southwest corner. There is a nursery, a landscape. Okay, what is it called now? Okay, thank you. And just south of that, there's a gravel road that runs up and to the house. And the house is still there. It's been broken into apartments now. Now, if you're driving south on 83, you can still see that house. So that was very important. And the thing with Poly was quite important. And the fact that Mencken was a self-taught man. I'm sorry. Yes, they had two. The Mencken family had two summer homes. This was the second one. The first one was in Ellicott City, what is now Ellicott City. August Pear, the father, was a cigar maker. And it was expected back then that the eldest son would go into the family business. Mencken did and hated it. And we know from what he wrote that he was so miserable he did consider suicide. Now, there are two ironies in Mencken's career. You see certain patterns after a while. Mencken had what was called, to use another Greek term, triskaidekaphobia. That's a great big long word, isn't it? It means fear of the number 13. And the father died on January 13th. And the father's death set Mencken free to write. Is that right?
Today is
Friday the 13th. So Mencken, the death of the father freed Mencken to write, and later the death of the mother freed Mencken to marry, because Mencken would not marry as long as his mother was alive. So the father's death freed him to write, and the mother's death freed him to marry. And you can see here he had a variety of jobs on the Baltimore papers. Now the date which is sacred is the date of the establishment of the Evening Sun, April 18th, 1910. What happened on September 15th, 1995? That was the end of the Sun. The end of the Sun. And I had lunch one day with an editor toward the end, and he said, "Vince, I don't want the Evening Sun to die on my watch." But it did. Now I'm oversimplifying here, but the thing that most hurts the evening newspapers is this thing right here. Right? It's hurt the evening newspapers much more than the morning, because your last close on an evening newspaper is usually noon. And when people come home now, they turn on and everything they wrote about noon is dead. First issue of the American Mercury, that was the magazine that Mencken and Nathan ran, 1924 to 1933. 1941, he stopped writing for the Sun papers. And in 48, he rejoined the Sun in June and suffered the stroke that robbed him of his ability to read and write. Can we go back and let me get a date here? Thank you. November 23rd, 1948. Do you know where Hopkins Field is? Homewood Field, University Parkway. His secretary lived right across the street from that. I was able to access this through her obit, and that's where he suffered his stroke. And we're going to do a visual later. You can cheat now and look up here, and that was Mencken after the stroke. Okay. Mencken and Darrow are at 704 Cathedral Street, right up here. And that building is now owned by the School for the Arts. And that was very important with the Scopes trial. Now, we're 98 years past that now. Right. Carol, my wife, and I, we did a story on Dayton way back in 1989. And the building where the Scopes trial was held is still a working courtroom. And Clarence Darrow was the lawyer who thoroughly embarrassed William James Bryan. This was Mencken, 1936. This was the Landon Convention. And you see this picture on the right. We use this as the cover photograph for 35 years of newspaper work. Landon lost badly. You know the story about Mencken and FDR. They despised each other. And Mencken befriended Landon, and to go back in the day in Baltimore history, Mencken gave him a dinner at the old Southern Hotel, which is no longer there. So the convention writing that Mencken did was very good, and it piques the envy of today's reporters because they're not as good. Trips to Europe. He met Sarah Palhart of Montgomery, Alabama, and Goucher College, and this exhibit over here talks about that. And it was a dream. They got along very well. She had grown up in Montgomery. One of her friends was Zelda Sarah Hart, and the other one was Tallulah Bankhead. And they got married in 1930. Any of you all from West Baltimore? Anybody know where Coppin State is? Coppin State College?
Mm-hmm.
West North Avenue and Warwick. That's where they got married, in that church. And that church has subsequently been deconsecrated, and it's an elder hostel now for the church. 1933, the end of Prohibition. Mencken was ambibulous. That's the term he coined. I drink everything. That was a lie. But the prohibition of photographs are very important. Right here. Rennert Hotel. Does anybody know where it was? Rennert. Southeast corner of Cathedral and Saratoga. It's a parking lot now, and this is where they ended the prohibition. There were two. April 7th was beer and wine, and December 5th was whiskey. This is the wedding photograph there at the church. Eastern end of Coppin, Warwick Avenue, and the church has now been deconsecrated. Now, look over here if we can. That's the original photograph, original portrait. If you'd like to walk over, take a look. Take a look. It's beautifully done. And trigger warning, when you look up here, it's not at all attractive. That was after this. Yeah. 1927. That photograph was 1927. And this was painted from a picture, 1955, and this was after the strip. Over here, right past this gentleman's left shoulder, that's that little tiny typewriter that looks like a toy. And when we do a tour, I use that as a mark to get us to Dayton, Tennessee, because that's where Mencken did his most important newspaper writing. And if you take a look at the computer, everything has changed now in terms of the writing process.
Vince made a very, very good point about how he can go more in depth on what we're learning today. The tour part, we have tours at the library currently on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. and Saturdays at 2 p.m. And Vince is here most Saturdays. So if you're interested in coming to the library to learn more about this room, besides what you're getting today, of course, just know that this could be a part of the tour. And even if it's not a part of that Wednesday or that Saturday, just know that you can contact us, which we'll be getting to very, very shortly when it comes to ways to reach out to us. I'm intrigued already, Vince, by everything that you've covered. I've been taking notes while also planting nice information seeds into those who are attending online. It's truly fascinating. Before we get into the research part as well, I just want to highlight some of the topics that have come in so far. We'll get to covering some of those topics and questions before we end today, but they include what was the most important influence on H.L. Mencken's life? Another question that came in includes, why such mixed feelings about Mencken?
He's a very controversial man.
To be continued, yes. And then another question that we received, and I think this is not totally covered yet. We had a question about Polly that was sent in earlier, and Vince, you covered that wonderfully. But on a personal side, was Mencken a nasty person or cordial? Or even better, what did he think about beauty? Some things that we'll think about as we get towards the end of today's program. So, big part with today's program is making sure you understand that we have too many ways to count when it comes to getting help at the H.L. Mencken room or something related to the H.L. Mencken room. Couple of key points. We really like it when an appointment is booked in advance. We will do our best if Vince is not here, if I'm not here, all the above's not here to find out how we can help you. Our special collections department will see what they can do. Some of our wonderful Pratt Library staff here may even try to find some answers to your question, but will most likely say, I need to make sure that Vince or Paul or special collections get back to you. But appointments are key. When it comes to something where you need a source, you find it, you're wondering, okay, I have the abstract, can I get full text access to it? We handle that type of question quite a bit. If you find something that's online on our digitalmaryland.org website, which is an online digitally curated service, and you're wondering, how can I get permissions for it? Just know that you can go to our special collections website where there is a rights and permission website where you can fill out a form and someone get back to you to make sure that you can use it in some sort of way if it's permittable or not. Those are just a few of the ways that you can get in touch with us. What I'm going to do now is cover what's known as our sub-collections. This is what you see physically in this room or nearby in some of our closed off areas are those sub-collections. So what I'm going to do is just briefly highlight what each of them is, and then Vince is going to add a little context to the images. So the collection that you see in front of you represents the process through publication of the works of H.L. Mencken. From manuscript to published material, the A collection includes writing by H.L. Mencken that eventually appeared in books, magazines, and newspaper columns. The collection also includes translations, radio addresses, speeches, and his early creative writing.
Yeah.
Vince, if you want to add some context.
Yes, he left us typescripts and clippings. And if you look at the clipping on the right, you'll notice that it's much longer than the newspaper stuff today. 1,500 words. You can't write that now. If I wrote a 1,500 word piece now for an editor, they think I was a lunatic. And on the left, you have the typescript, and you'll notice that there are almost no corrections here. Now, he could write a piece clean the first time, which I can't do. He wrote much better than I did. Very few people could do that. Yeah. Yes. As we all know, the hardest thing to do when you write is to get to the typewriter. Nobody wants to go. It's antisocial. Now, Mencken was very smart because what he did is he used the mail as a warm up. And there were two mails back then. There was a morning and an evening. And he would use the mail as a warm up. Now, we initially thought he'd written 100,000 letters. Way low. Way low. About 200,000. And we have a lot of these letters here. This letter here to Edgar Kemmler. Kemmler was one of the first biographers of Mencken, 1950. One more thing here on these letters. When you write biography, you have to be able to put together chronology, right? And I've written a couple. The second one I wrote was of Gerald Johnson, and there was no chronology. I had to start from scratch. And the letters were extremely important. Now, how many people write letters anymore? It's all email, right? And it's going to change the face of scholarship. Yeah. Ventures in the Verse was the first book written under Mencken's byline. It was 1903, and it was modeled on Kipling. And some of the poems are good, some of them are not so good. Now, for the bibliophiles, for a presentation copy now, and what that means is you have a copy that's dated and has a salutation and an inscription and a complimentary close and a signature. Don't fall out of your chair. 20 large. 20 large. And we own a number of these copies now. Now,
if Vince, if you can add some context to what we see on the screen.
yes. Now, for example, where this is invaluable, I got a query from a newspaper man in Atlanta, and he said, "Can you find out what Southern newspapers said about Mencken's marriage in 1925?" And see, if you're doing this by legwork, it's virtually impossible. But see, all I had to do was look at the scrapbook, which is largely chronological, and right here in this middle here. If you want to come over and take a look, that's fine. Step up, and this one on the right is an old scrapbook, and this one where the gentleman is looking at is one of the newer ones. And we do all this now electronically, but we have a 110-year record of this, and from the point of view of scholarship, it's invaluable. Oh my goodness! Listen, James T. Farrell. Did I hear right? I knew him. I knew him a little bit. I went to grad school in New York, and Farrell lived in Manhattan. And I wrote to Farrell about something he'd written on Mencken, and he wrote back. He was very nice. A lot of these writers don't do that, but he was very nice to me. And Mencken and he were very close friends. Yeah. He actually put together an anthology of Mencken's writing. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Probably 70s. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. What now? I don't know that quotation. Yes. Farrell put together a collection of Mencken's prejudices, and Mencken did very well with what's called naturalistic writing, mimetic fiction, and the studs line again that he did was something that Mencken appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. Something that I just want to point out about the clippings before we proceed to the F collection is that we have a whole listing of the scrapbooks that contains the clippings on our website. So in case you need a copy of that document, just let us know. It's quite remarkable. And if you want to learn more about how to get access to some of those clippings online on your own, I can definitely go into depth about that, but one of the best ways to do it is through our historical newspapers, through what's called newspapers.com. A lot of smaller publications in there that contain some of the clippings that we have learned about today. Not all, but some. So with the F collection, this consists of an extensive photographic record of the Mencken family, as well as various family documents. For example, you can even get the wills of Mencken family members in the F collection. It also contains copies of books authored by members of the Mencken family. Vince, if you may.
Sarah Hart Mencken, and we have an exhibit over here. She grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, girlhood friend of Zelda Sarah Fitzgerald. And here's a name from the past, Tallulah Bankhead, the actress. And Sarah wrote several books. The Making of a Lady was 1930, and that was what was called a Condition of the South novel, where they talk about the clash between the agrarian and the industrial South. And the other one, Southern Album, was published posthumously. And she passed way too young. If you take a look at the exhibit here, her DOB was 1898. She was way younger than Mencken. And the DOD was 1935. She had TB. And they didn't have the drugs that they know now. So Mencken wrote the introduction to that edition. Now, By the Neck, if I can crib from myself, it's a memorable but macabre title. By the Neck. And it's a history of hangings. Oh, my Lord. History of hangings. And that was put together by Mencken's brother, August. And Mencken wrote the introduction. August was an unusual man. He was an engineer and very good with his hands. We have a beautiful desk over here behind Mr. Paul that we could take a look at later. So he wrote By the Neck. Now, the book on the right is called, I'll give you the Latin title and then we'll do the English. De Charlatanerie Eruditorum. Let me do that again so I don't buggle the Latin. De Charlataneria Eruditorum. The nonsense of the learned. The knavishness. That's probably a better word. The knavishness of the learned. And that was written by one of Mencken's ancestors. So there were a number of people in the family who were literate besides H.L.
Thank you, Vince. So the G collection. This is the collection that we have that continues to grow. It's H.L. Mencken's personal library, as well as copies of books, pamphlets, and various volumes devoted in part to Mencken's life and works. And we continue to add to it. You never know when someone may have something to gift to us, something to review, or we find something ourselves that might be worthwhile to add to the collection. Vince, if you may.
The Sage in Harlem. Charles Scruggs is retired now. He's a professor of English at Arizona. And this is as the title suggests, it's a book that talks about Mencken's importance for writers of color. And this is something we're probably going to get a question about later. And I've got numerous questions about this, so we can talk about this. Mencken did more than any other white editor to help writers of color, especially with the American language. And yet, and I suspect we're going to get questions about this, some of the language he used was just reprehensible. Again, if I can crib for myself, it was unfortunate for Mencken's day and unconscionable. Unconscionable. I don't think that's too strong an adjective. Unconscionable for ours. So Professor Scruggs did a very good job with that, talking about Mencken and writers of color. And Menckeniana, this goes back to 2014. If you're from Baltimore, you probably know this name, Professor Larry Gibson, the lawyer. And he gave the talk that year on Mencken, and he talked about Mencken and race. Now, to go back in the day, the Murray case, do you remember that at all? Sure, yeah, thank you. All right. And that was something that was very important for Mencken to write about that. So Mencken was paradoxical. There were contradictions in him, and we're probably going to get some questions about that later. But for writers of color, Mencken was beyond argument. He did more than any other white man. Okay.
And then the H collection, the final collection, is one of Mencken's most extensive sub-collections, as it focuses on his philology and his lifelong interest in the American language.
Mencken concluded very wrongly, in my opinion, very wrongly, that he would be remembered longest for his philology. I don't think he will be. But the philology is important. If you write, you have to have an ear. If you don't have an ear, you can't write because it's cacophonous. It's just sounds that they run together. We all know that, right? And Mencken had a tremendous ear, and he loved the American idiom, and he collected it. And it wasn't the language that you heard in schools. It was the language you heard in baseball parks and bars and when young people court on the front porch. Okay, so it wasn't the academic language. Good.
Thank you, Vince, for adding some more context into that final collection of ours. So we just learned about the sub-collections in its entirety, in a nutshell. And now it's very important to grasp how we do a great amount of, take a great amount of research questions here, information questions here. We have loyal customers. We have customers who are contacting us for the first time, really needing a foot in the right door, in the right path. But we also have plenty of affiliates and institutions that are invaluable to supporting the Mencken Room as well, and also being research hubs. So the Mencken House. This Mencken House and Museum was the residence of H.L. Mencken at 1524 Holland Street in the Union Square neighborhood for most of his life, where he died in 1956. It was purchased new in 1883 by his father, August Mencken. It was built by Jacob Sohm in the Italianate style as part of a row of almost identical brick houses on the north side of Union Square. House and garden were an integral and vital part of Mencken's life, from where he preferred to live and work along with family. And without getting bogged down into the details this evening, because this is an introduction, it's good to know that the house, the museum itself, which is now a museum, it reopened on December 1st, 2019. So there was an extensive amount of time where the Mencken House was not available for all of us to learn more about. And if you are interested in learning more about the Mencken House, please ask for Brigitte Fezenden. Important name to know. And then the Mencken Society. They promote the works of H.L. Mencken. That's the briefest way to explain it. They encourage a wider audience than scholars or journalists. They do their part through their website, a newsletter, and very important, through financial support of the Mencken Room here at the Enoch Pratt Free Library. If you want to learn more about the Mencken Society and what they can do to help you with your research, please ask for Daryl Hart as a start. Some of the affiliates, but not all of the affiliates, are here in front of you. And it's important to note that one of them does have a collection that's available through our digitalmaryland.org website. That's Goucher's Hart and Mencken collection. You can get plenty of primary sources there, letters between them. It's a unique source. If you're interested in learning about Goucher's collection, please ask for Kristen Welsenbach. With Hopkins and their collections connected to Dean, please ask for Gabrielle Dean. And for University of Maryland, please ask for Joni Floyd and Amber Coe. They focus on historical Maryland special collections. And equally important when it comes to learning more about Mencken, something related to Mencken, all of the above about Mencken. Just know that the Mencken Room collaborates often with other departments to help in research matters. And I'm just going to highlight briefly a few of them. The Fiction and Humanities Department, they have copies of a great amount of Mencken's works to check out. So American language was mentioned earlier. You can check out the American language from the Fiction and Humanities Department, along with more of those philological sources. The Maryland department, which if you're physically in the building tonight, you would just go one floor up to visit Maryland. Not Maryland State, but Maryland department. They have biographical sources about Mencken that you can check out. Periodicals department. They house microfilm of magazines and newspapers that involved Mencken. If you'd like to find articles that are not necessarily available through our research databases, periodicals department is good to go to. Sometimes Vince and I have to collaborate with the periodicals department to find out how something's available if it's not through a research database or through just a search engine. American Mercury, Smart Set, Baltimore Herald, Baltimore Evening Sun, they're available directly in the periodicals department. And references to Digital Maryland, you've seen them throughout tonight's presentation, those photos. Yeah, you can get them physically in the Mencken room, but you can also get them online. Just make sure to check on the rights and permissions in case you need to use them in a certain way. Vince, I defer to you on that.
Did everybody hear the question? The American Mercury? I'll tell you what I know, and we can count up later. The American Mercury, Mencken began to edit it in January of 1924. And he edited it until December 1933. It was a monthly, but it didn't stay a monthly. So what happened was, and what I'm going to tell you now is a little bit oversimplified, but the crash had a terrible effect. Stock market crash had a terrible effect on American magazines. Now, the Mercury circulation had started to fall as early as December 28th. And it went way downhill by the time Mencken stopped editing it. Now, this is a very interesting question that you asked because it's something that I've worked on before. And I was approached about writing the history of the Mercury, and I thought it was going to be easy money. Stupid me. Stupid me. So what happened with the Mercury, and if you'll contact with me, I'll give you a copy of what I've written. It moved from way to the left to way to the right. It changed from a monthly to a quarterly. It missed issues. And by the end of the Mercury, it's a very sad story. It had moved way far to the right. And there was all kind of bad stuff going on. Misogyny, homophobia, anti-Semitism. This would have been 50s, 60s, 70s. Now the Mercury finally folded up with no notice of cessation. It just stopped in 1980. So we can count that up if you want, but it began in 24, it ended in 80. Ideologically, it was all over the place. And it ended with no notice of cessation. Now, to give you the name that you'll know right away, William Buckley. William Buckley wrote for the Mercury. At one time. Before the National Review. So that's a very interesting question that the gentleman asked. Mencken stopped editing the Mercury in December of 33. He continued writing for it later, but not too much. Yeah. That's a very good question, and thank you. And we can count up the number of issues if you want. I don't know if it... Yeah. So Mencken's issues, I can give that off the top of my head. As editor, 120.
Just know that if you need that in-depth research help, you've come to the right place. Yeah. We will definitely continue that conversation with you.
Right.
So
right, 120, yes.
So very important to put in plugs for our online research databases which are accessible with the Pratt Library card. JSTOR, if you want scholarly articles, peer-reviewed articles, JSTOR is the place to go. If you simply just in the general JSTOR search put in quotation marks HL Mencken, you'll get well over 1,000 results. You'll probably get approximately 1,500 results when it comes to search results with articles that make some sort of reference to Mencken or specifically about him. You could type in American language into the Menckeniana search engine, which you don't even need a library card to access. Menckeniana, which is available through JSTOR, that's open access. You can browse through the issues that were from 1962 to 2022 and get what you need. Whether you browse directly through Menckeniana or JSTOR in general, just know that you can put in titles of some of Mencken's works and you'll get literary criticisms and results. Just make sure those quotation marks are in there. That's key and crucial. And something that I've come across when it's come to Mencken or something related to Mencken are researchers who they feel like they just have to immediately go through Maryland newspapers to find what they need. But I'm here to tell you that you need to definitely add the historical and current newspapers that go well beyond the Maryland publications online into your research. Historical newspapers, as was mentioned earlier, how you can go through newspapers.com through there to find out about articles mentioning Mencken through smaller publications. You have the major publications and historical newspapers as well. And the current newspapers, for those of us who are especially curious about what is relevant about Mencken nowadays, just type in Mencken or put in quotation marks HL Mencken into the current newspaper search, specifically the US News Stream, and you'll learn more. If you do advanced searches into any of the databases that you see in front of us, I suggest narrowing down your search to just the abstracts and summaries. So that way you can find out if something is focused solely on Mencken or not. Yes, that is available in microfilm through our periodicals department. Unfortunately, it's not browsable through our ProQuest databases.
May I piggyback on that?
Yeah.
1986, April, May 1986 was a very pivotal time in Baltimore journalism because two things happened within a month of each other. The old News American, do you remember it? Folded up. And within 1 month, the A.S. Abel Company sold the Sun. So the Sun it was sold to the Times Mirror Syndicate in Los Angeles. So the whole landscape of Baltimore journalism changed in 1986. Now, one more thing, for the Hearst newspapers and the old News American was a Hearst, okay. I got this. Y'all have been a great audience because we're learning from each other. See, that's what you want. You want the interactive. Now, Mencken wrote for a Hearst newspaper, but way back in here, the New York American, which was a Hearst paper. Mencken wrote for a guy named Bergman, whom I knew. He's gone now. He was Mencken's editor. And Mencken wrote for a Hearst paper largely on philology. Mencken did not have a lot of respect for Hearst. And I can't repeat this remark at Polite Company. I wrote it, but I can't put it out here. I can't. But he quoted another writer. I can't put it out. It's too obscene. But it was a situation where Mencken did not have a lot of respect for Hearst, but he was willing to take a paycheck from him when he wrote for the News American. Okay, New York American. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. That was extremely important to fit in there, and that leads us directly into our Q&A, our official Q&A. Thanks everyone for staying overtime for this program. By the way, it really means a lot. Vince, if it's okay with you, I'm going to just repeat some of the questions that were from
Okay,
earlier.
that's fine, yeah.
And I'm going to start with kind of going a little lighter, but then maybe a little bit more on the heavier side. So let's see. What did Henry H.O. Mencken think about beauty, or what did he think was the most important influence on his life?
The most important writer, Mencken had the most important writers were Nietzsche, Darwin, Thomas Henry Huxley, and Herbert Spencer. Right? Mencken was a derivative thinker rather than an original one. Mencken loved beauty. He hated ugliness. And take a look at the essay, the libido for the ugly, where he talks about the environs of Pittsburgh, where he went up to see his brother.
So why mixed feelings about Mencken?
Mencken was very controversial. He could be extremely generous and churlish. He used language sometimes which is reprehensible. Whitman famously said, "Do I contradict myself? Do I contradict myself?" Mencken did. And Mencken was like that very much. The Diary of H.L. Mencken came out in late 1989, and it generated a huge controversy. It generated a brouhaha on the American literary scene. And since that time, the whole question of Mencken and racism and Mencken and anti-Semitism has been asked repeatedly. And I suggested in the Mencken biography that I wrote that since that time, anybody who writes about Mencken is going to have to address these questions. Now, I'm on the record. I do not think he was an anti-Semite. I don't think he was a racist. But other people have argued the opposite case very compellingly. So there's a lot of contradiction in Mencken, very controversial figure. Yes. See, on the one hand, he used language which I can't repeat here. Can't repeat it. About all ethnic groups. He was an equal opportunity insulter, right? But on the other hand, in terms of what Mencken did, for example, in terms of the anti-Semitism, Mencken wrote a very important column called Help for the Jews in 1938, where he really went after Roosevelt for the quotas. And Mencken suggested we not do that. And in terms of the writing, right, in terms of the editing, he did more for writers of color than any other white editor. So he was contradictory. And the questions that are being asked now are ones that will keep being asked. And there's no facile answer for it.
You say he's an equal opportunity cynic, people and so on. What kind of program did he have for Germans? Did he ever have any curse words or any kind of slurs against Germans, people of German ancestry?
The question that Germany was very important. What happened with Mencken during the war?
I don't need to hit this. I'm talking German. You say, he had strong words that you can't repeat about Jews, about blacks, about other ethnic groups. How about Germans? Did he have any words that were offensive to Germans?
Yes, he talked about Hitler as a lunatic.
Before Hitler, I'm talking about from the time he began at the Herald up till 1930.
I can't recall now.
What
Okay.
we'll do is, as long as you contact us, we will further explore it. We'll get you on the right path. And I'll just add in that when it comes to finding the pros and cons, the fors and against, when it comes to researching Mencken, add in that diary keyword when you're using those historical newspapers and those current newspapers. Make sure to use both of those databases, because if you think you're just going to get everything in the historical ones that may only go up to the early 90s, you're going to be totally wrong. Add in those current newspapers to your searches. I assure you, you'll get several results. And you can narrow them down by putting in different classes, economic classes, different cultures, different races. You'll be amazed with the results that you'll get on what people thought about Mencken and his viewpoints. That diary opened up that access to information.
Those are very important questions you're asking. And as I said, they have been asked and they will continue to be asked. Sure.
Yes.
FDR, Mencken despised FDR because they were completely different on the whole notion of fiscal economy. Mencken voted for FDR in 32 and 44. And he voted for him in 32 because of prohibition. And he voted for him in 44 because he had no respect for the opponent. Mencken despised FDR. The catalyst for the contempt was the December Gridiron Club, 1934, where FDR thoroughly embarrassed him. So they were very different economically and philosophically, and there was the personal issue of the embarrassment at the Gridiron Club in 1934.
So
What exactly happened is FDR was very clever. He read from something that Mencken wrote attacking journalists. And Mencken was humiliated. And it's a great story. FDR was smart. And he wrote from something that Mencken had written in Prejudice, where Mencken talked about American journalism being so bad, and that he didn't identify it till the end. And he said, "This was written by my good friend, Henry Mencken." So that didn't go well.
So at this point, we got an introduction, definitely got more. We were hoping for more. We were ready for more. So thank you for getting us onto that path, because that's what we hope you'll do after tonight. We hope that you'll start wanting to get more introduced to Mencken and proceed. You got the contact information. You know how to reach us. You can ask for us by name. We'll make sure to help you. Just want to thank the Enoch Pratt Free Library leadership for making it possible for us to have this program today. If you weren't here when Eben introduced us, which, by the way, Eben, thank you very much for supporting this program, along with Deborah, who's one of our special collections librarians.
Thank you, Deborah.
We got just about the whole crew here this evening. Just know that when it comes to getting help that you need, we're really here to help. And we hope that you'll pick our minds, want to learn more, do something not just with us, but on your own as well. Thank you all very much for your time, and we'll continue to be here until closing. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much.